was looking at this, but then YouTube says that someone is. So I don't know. I certainly am not, because I really dislike when I listen to myself. So, so hey, welcome again to this thing. This past week, and this is kind of a disclaimer, I was able to do nothing whatsoever because I was at a work retreat, but I see that some progress was done, and there are a couple of things that we may want to discuss, and I have like two points in my mental agenda. One is having a little bit more verbal discussion on the format negotiation that we have also in the issue queue. I will post any conclusions that we come if we do in the issue. And the other one is something that just thought of it, and it could be kind of cool to add, and is the use of links. We are not adding any extra links, and we could just with minimal effort on the entities, because we know how to generate those links, because we have that concept baked into the entity API. But yeah, does anyone else have any other point to add to the agenda? And then, of course, we can talk about the general status of things. Okay, so
the only thing kind of that I can mention is maybe the few core commits and the one RTBC issue that are going to make a difference for the JSON API module, that are going to make it better.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but none of them are the type of core commit that we benefit from free. For free, we still need to do some follow-up work on all of the areas that those affect, right?
No, some of that you get for free.
Oh, neat. Go on, please.
Oh, okay. So there's two commits that are relevant for the JSON API module. The moving of the REST module's link manager into the serialization module, which is why you are talking about links in the first place, I think. So that really belonged to the serialization module all along, and now it's actually been moved there, but backwards compatibility has been kept. And so now we can look into how the JSON API's link manager, because the JSON API module also has a link manager, how we can make that integrate or extend the existing link manager in the serialization module insofar as possible, or maybe expand the API that the serialization module's link manager offers, so that the JSON API module doesn't have to invent its own thing, so that the link manager in the serialization module can be as good and broadly applicable as possible. So that's the first. The second is custom link relationships. Daniel worked on that one a lot. So thank you, Daniel, for getting that to the point where it got to, where it was able to get in. Daniel's pulling a crazy face, but you really did most of the work there, Daniel. And so maybe that's also an area where JSON API module can leverage that. And then the other one that isn't in yet is the issue with the number 2808233. And it's about improving for 3 responses. So currently, if you don't have access to an entity, for example, you're not allowed to get it, or you're not allowed to post or patch one, or maybe you're not allowed to patch one because you're trying to modify a certain field, and otherwise you are allowed to, just not that one field. Currently, you will just get a 403 response, like 403, that's it. Good luck figuring it out. And it's really painful to figure out. And the patch that has been RTBC for weeks at this point, that will hopefully still go into 8.3, will actually tell you you're not being granted access because you don't have this permission, or because you don't have that node grant. So that will make a big difference for both REST and JSON API. And so I'm really hoping that one will go in, because we've had quite a few support requests over the past few months relating to this won't work. I get a 403. I have no idea how to get along, how to get further. And this would just solve that completely. Those are the three.
Cool. So about custom links, I think that there is a possibility to refactor the JSON API code, so the links that the spec highly recommends, which are the links for relationships, namely self and relationships. Sorry, self and related inside of a relationship payload. Those could be this kind of custom link, if I understood the context properly. About the link manager, if I remember correctly, and last I looked into that, it was months ago, the link manager depends on entity links, and if so, we may need to define our links with crazier-ish prefix JSON API inside of the end, and I don't know how much frowning we will get for that. So in order to use the link manager in the serialization module, we would need to add those links to the entity definitions. Would that be correct?
I don't know the link manager in detail myself, to be honest. I just needed to be moved, and it's been a long time since I looked at the details. But I think that's what you want also for the thing you first mentioned. So what you're talking about now is a new link relation type. And so JSON API would have its own relation type, so something like JSON API-canonical or something like that. I don't know what it would be called exactly. That would indeed live in the entity definition. Then that would appear automatically, and that would then also be something. So there is a overlap between custom link relation types, custom link relationships, and the link manager on the other hand, like it's all tied together.
Right. So we could just provide a YAML plugin defining our link types, and then somehow
alter the entity type definition so that there is another link relation, a link template defined in there, and then it would theoretically work. But I think Daniel wants to say something clever about UUIDs.
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, actually, you can already do that without the custom link relation types. Like you can already just alter the entity type and register your link relation there, as, for example, the content translation module is doing already. So sometimes I don't get the point of this custom link relation type.
Well, you added a code to the REST resource that made sure that we would only send link relationships that are actually registered as a custom link relation type. So
fair, yeah. Otherwise, yeah. But I mean, we need still some custom code anyway. Like, for example, we want to expose like all possible translations as links, and we can't generalize over them, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe we need some way to allow modules to provide those links.
Yeah, there's more work to be done there for sure. Like Drupal 8 started out with weak APIs, I would say, for link relation management and so on. Because everything you said is totally true. So we need to look into how to do that in a correct way, an extensible way, and so on.
Would an actionable item that we could create a ticket for right now be create JSON API, create the links that we already have in JSON API as an alteration of the entity, so we have them defined there, so we can then follow up and make the custom JSON API link manager at least leaner. We may not be able to get rid of it, at least initially, but we could just leverage that the link render part, if that makes sense.
Maybe. I think we are now able to look into what is possible better, because until now you were forced in a JSON API module to have your own system, and now it is possible to build on the infrastructure that Core provides. That's all I can meaningfully, constructively say, I think, right now.
Okay, cool. Sorry, taking notes. I cannot speak and take notes at the same time. I'm one of those. Cool. And regarding 403, I don't think that it makes much of an impact in JSON API because we are already kind of having to surface that manually, and we cannot really leverage the work that Core does because we need to normalize the error differently anyways. So we have to have our own normalizer. And
the one thing which changes though is that if you call entity access, for example, it actually returns you an error message. Unlike before, where we just got back nothing pretty much. So I think that's something JSON API could use.
Oh, you mean that instead of adding our custom message, we should just reuse the message that we get from the... Okay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which might be, you have, like the current user doesn't have permission X, or depending on your access checking, might be something else.
It may even be the same error message. Who knows? But
unlikely, but yeah, it's possible.
Okay. Cool. When do you mind if I ping you when I create these two tickets if I ping you the ticket number so you can link to the appropriate Core ones?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Perfect. Anything else to add regarding this?
Nope.
All right. Then I guess that to follow a little bit with the links, we can. So right now, when we load an entity, we can know a lot of links about the entity, right? And currently, we are only populating the self link, which is a pointer to itself in JSON API, which is recommended by the specification, but nothing else. I was wondering, we output the registered link, the links that are registered inside of the payload every time that we render an entity that has some of those links. And I guess that the follow-up question is that could load the response unnecessarily, and we don't have an official way of removing links from a response as we have for fields. So that kind of, it's the trade-off.
Yeah, I guess one question we could ask ourselves, like, which links should actually be exposed? Mm-hmm. Like, is there some criteria we could apply? Is there a way to detect, okay, these are just really useful for JSON API or for REST? Because, like, for example, the AMP module might expose like a link relation type which points to the AMP representation of the entity, and maybe that's useful, probably not.
Right. My first guess at an answer is that it would need manual work and selection, which is something that we want to avoid, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, avoid configuration and that sort of thing. I have the suspicion that the main reason that links are inside of the payload in JSON API is because that makes it easier to do caching and to do the recursive relationship stuff. So, well, not necessarily recursive, but say that you're requesting article 1, and that's just all you're requesting. In the payload, there is a self link. And then you're requesting, say, a term, and then a relationship that is followed is all articles that are tagged with that term. So all of a sudden, you have a payload that is first the term itself with its self link, then all articles in that relationship, and then each of those articles again has a self link. And so the fact that the link lives in the side of the payload means that we can reuse the exact same bit of JSON that we had for the original separate request for the article. We can reuse it again in that list of articles that is referenced from the term. And I strongly suspect that that is the reason why JSON API puts it inside of the body, the response body, and not the response headers, because that makes it a lot easier. Plus, it means that you need to process all of the links in the exact same way, and you can store things, you can parse things and cache it locally on the client in a consistent way, because otherwise you would need to choose to parse either from the response headers or from the payload, but they're actually the same. And yeah, that almost makes me wonder whether we should never put JSON API responses, the links inside of JSON responses. I think we maybe should never put them in the response headers, because otherwise we kind of break that principle, right? At least that's how I perceive it as a principle. It's not documented in the spec.
Right.
So
yeah.
I'm not entirely clear on it.
It is. I think that it's a reasonable guess that the self link is the best attempt at a cache ID of the JSON object that it points to, because it kind of has all the necessary data to get that exact payload, while with the type and ID may not be sufficient because of the includes, the sparse field sets, and sorting and all that fun. So maybe we should just avoid adding more links and just.
Well, there's a difference between adding more links and making because this is using links in the exact same way that the link response header is used, right? In REST and everywhere else. It's I don't think we should necessarily limit it, but I was specifically talking about the aspect of a given entity. It actually has more link relationships, so technically we should be adding all of those link relationships as well. That's what we were first talking about.
Right.
But then should we do it at the response level, or should we do it inside of the payload? Should we do it inside of the body, the JSON API body? And it seems to me that we specifically need to continue to do it within the body, because otherwise we make things a lot harder and inconsistent. And I think all clients pretty much expect it to be there.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I was only thinking about the response body.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that's, I mean, since you have kind of a response tree with includes, which is not really a tree but a flattened thing. The link relationship then would be really weird, because you need to know what it refers to, because it can refer to partials inside of that response. So yeah, I was assuming that it would be in the body, but the fact that I don't see much use unless something is manually vetted to be added into that links section, and the fact that if we do it like automatically, it will bloat the response body a lot, and we don't have a way to say, okay, I don't care about all these links. Yep. Unless we require manual override of the normalizer, which it seems like too much to ask.
So is there like a limit? We can just say it's like translations, and what else would we need? And what else could be useful?
The example that is listed in the JSON API spec is a related link that links to a related resource collection. So given an article, a related link would be to its comments.
So basically every entity reference.
I think so, yes.
Yeah,
then,
that is already in. I mean, that
Yeah.
is already being output because that is part of the highly recommended bits of the implementation. And it kind of ties with the idea that for each resource, we have 4 endpoints, the collection, the individual item, and then you can have the relationship and the related. So that is easy to spot in the routes generation code. So those links play with those concepts a little bit. I was thinking more of adding extra things that only make sense inside of Drupal, like the translation stuff. But I cannot come up with anything else.
Yeah, maybe it's best to just stick to the current list of things, the current list of links, and just have that as a way or as an optional feature for the future. Like it is something we can still expand in the future that wouldn't break anything.
Mm-hmm.
We could add more links later, but I think, yeah, for now, this seems like a good list.
Cool.
Do we already have links for translations, as Daniel was saying?
No.
Okay. So the one thing that I was thinking is that it might be interesting to define link relation types for JSON API, a self link relation type, and maybe a related link relation type or a relationship. But maybe we need multiple ones. It's not clear to me how you can, if you have multiple entity reference fields, how that currently works. I haven't looked at that. But basically, if you have references to both users and terms and maybe other articles, something like that, then I don't know how that's currently expressed. But what could make sense is if we have link relation types that have a name that starts with JSON API dash or JSON API colon, whatever. And then we only add those link relation types that start with that JSON API prefix. That would then allow contrib modules to still add more links to JSON API responses. So you still have some extensibility. For example, for translations, if that is something that needs to be separate, so we could define a hook that is implemented on behalf of the content translation module, so that the content translation module is a thing that actually adds translation links for our resources. Something like that may work, but maybe I don't know the implementation details well enough to say that will work. It's just something that might work.
Okay, that would be at least using the custom link relation types would be a way to get the eligible links, so we don't have to worry about manually vetting.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I will try to capture this into an issue summary, but yeah, feel free to edit or comment on that. Cool. Does anyone have any extra thoughts on this? So
I have one quick comment. I think from coming back to this, should we put it in the header versus the body? I think from a pure developer experience point of view, the body is just way better, because that's where you actually look things up. And I think this header stuff is mostly about automated tools, and I'm not sure whether this is even a 5% use case on actual projects.
You mean specifically for JSON API, or even in general, also for core REST, actually?
I guess I meant it for JSON API, but now that you mention it's probably a generic thing.
Yeah, I 1000% agree with JSON API, with your explanation being valid for JSON API, because it's in the spec and everybody's doing it that way, so you expect it that way. For core REST, I can see it being true. I think it's actually kind of true for the help JSON formats, because there we do have some links in there. That makes it even more confusing. I actually think that the reason that it's only relevant for the 5% that you mentioned is that almost nobody is used to it, so everybody puts it in the body anyway, so everybody's expected to put it in the body, so it doesn't get put in the header, and then like it's a vicious cycle reinforcing itself.
I think another aspect is that HTTP headers can't be how it's called, compressed, unlike the HTTP body.
Yeah, HTTP2 changes that, of course, but
oh, that's fair. That's fair. But
yeah, that's not readily available yet, so it doesn't really help us. But yeah, +1.
Cool. Anything else on links and how we totally only pay attention to the body? So I think that the last point on the agenda is to talk about a little bit on the format, automatic format derivation. So we can at any point during the bootstrap set see that the request is for root/JSON API, whatever, and say, okay, manually set the format to JSON API, regardless of what the underscore format says, or even if, even better, if the underscore format is not set, we set it for you. So you don't really need to set it, because you are kind of implicitly setting it by the fact that you request /JSON API, right? You expect to have everything in the JSON API format, which was a design strategy that we took at the beginning of the development. So ideally, we would just have to do this, whenever we are processing the request, we match the request to a route, and from the route parameters, we see that this is a JSON API route, and then we set the format. The main problem that we're having is that before we match the request to a route, things may go awry, and we need to capture that exception and respond in a JSON API format. But we don't know that this is a JSON API request yet. So that is the main problem that we're having for errors that happen before the route has been matched. And so therefore, we cannot access anything inside of the route definition. Does that make sense? So yeah, we could add some kind of code that inspects the request, but we need it to be set like as early as possible, like the current underscore format does it.
Yeah, I think it's a fair summary. I don't know that it's that common that things will go awry, that things will fail before writing has happened. Like the majority of the time, like why does a JSON API ever throw an error? It's because it cannot read what's being sent by the clients, or it's because the logic that JSON API executes for some reason fails. But at that point, you've already determined that it's going to go to the JSON API module, that it's going to a route of the JSON API module. So I'm not sure that that's really the big concern, that that we cannot deal with error handling correctly at a very early stage, because that's like that can go wrong either way. Like it could even crash before you get to that point if you follow that argument. So I think it's mostly about what happens after we've determined that it's the JSON API routes, and then how do we make it sure that error responses are encoded properly according to the JSON API spec.
403, I think, happens right before that, right?
Yeah, currently 403 happens as part of the main routing for some design decisions. So 403 is actually...
You mean for basic auth then? So if a basic auth fails, that sort of thing?
I actually talked just about normal access checking. But
okay, so route access checking.
Yeah.
Route access, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there you get there you actually get the attributes you set on the route. So in the patch Vim vote, that would actually allow us to use, to not do anything else than set it on the route definition.
So the patch I posted this morning, you mean?
Yeah, this works for 403 errors. For
Also,
like normal route access things, but it doesn't work for 404 errors. Like if you, let's assume like an entity bundle goes away or someone uses the wrong entity type name, like puts an S into articles, because that never happens. Then you get a 404, and then you also cannot find like a matching route.
And you're saying that the solution you posted using that super early lazy route filter, that prevents that problem. That makes sure that things still work as expected, so you would get a JSON API error response.
I'm not happy about that solution, but any
no, I'm just asking.
Any solution which is as early as possible.
Yes, but so
yours for a 4 case at least.
Yeah, so yours is earlier, and so it does work for that 404 case. That's what you're saying. Okay, I didn't realize that. So that's if that's the case, then +1. it's that simple. It's just I'd rather not add a lazy route filter thingamajig. I'd rather just use the existing infrastructure. But you're right that it would fail for that. So
I mean,
unfortunate.
I'm also not convinced by the solution itself. Maybe I know that Matteo did some experiments with like some middleware, which is like super early, and just match the incoming path where that contains /JSON API.
If it starts with that, yeah.
Yeah, well, contains because of path prefixes and everything.
Yeah, that could be a problem if you blog about JSON API.
Yeah, that was the major issue actually. Like,
okay, there you go.
Well, there's not much. There's not much we can do besides adding some dirty hash to the URL instead of JSON API, having it be a per site hash.
Make a typo into JSON API.
It would be even worse than the problem that we're fixing.
You could make a typo into JSON API.
Yeah, because I never type JSON with an A between the J and the S, right?
Yeah.
So I think it would be valuable to have a comparison of the different. So the current system of using !_formats equals means that it works in all the cases. The approach you proposed, Daniel, means that you can omit that query string, but it still works in all the cases. And the thing I proposed also omits the query string, but then fails if you have, for example, a typo in your URL and you go to JSON API /articles with ss, and then it blows up with a non-JSON API response. I think those are is that a correct comparison?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So there is, what was the saying again? Choosing between pest and cholera, or okay. Lesser of different evils. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, if we could work out the 403, which I do think it's critical, the 403 for the route. 404, it's kind of it's explicit enough. It's like, okay, what did I send? I sent the URL, so I need to check the URL. It's not like the error message that we're going to return back is going to say any more than that, right? So with the status code, it may be enough. So we just need to figure out how to make it, how to make it work right before we do the access checks for the route. itself.
Yep.
And also to not fail with basic auth wrong credentials, which it wasn't in my mind, but that's a fair point.
You made a really good point. I mean, if you want to handle errors, you would handle them case by case anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you would handle a 4.3 error different than a 4.4 error, because like you maybe want to show some message to the user, or just trigger a different code path. So given that, if you would check for the 404 in the status code anyway, so you could then also trigger a different code path, which like for JSON, which is structured differently than JSON API. JSON. So I guess that kind of convinces me that Vim's solution is the way to go.
Before we commit to any solution, I would say I will write test coverage that shows the tests maybe 3 cases. 404 because of typo, 403 because of denied entity access, and basic auth credentials are wrong. And we can then
route access.
What's that?
It should be
route access, yes.
Because the entity
yes.
happens later, and that
Yes.
one we do catch.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you. And I think we can then quite easily compare the 3 different solutions. We will not be able to run them on Drupal.org because we need a core patch to be applied, but we can run them locally and then just report back how they each behave. Mm-hmm. Then we have a better way of comparing them, I think. Make sense, cool. Daniel? Cool. So I'm working on a comment on that issue that gets all of this together. So the downsides of each of the 3 that we currently have, and then how to decide which solution to pick, or maybe to not pick any solution and stick with what we have in hand. And then we'll be able to continue in a more constructive way in that issue.
Would you agree that the earlier that we set the format, the more errors that we catch, but also the errors that we catch very early are the less significant?
Yes, I think, because there's less branching very early, if you know what I mean. Like there's less possible root causes for something to say 404 than there is for something to say 403, for example. Like 404 just means this URL, nothing is there, goodbye. That's pretty easy to figure out. 403, like that could be due to route access, entity access, and then within entity access there could be a gazillion reasons. And beyond that, it's even more complex. So I think that makes sense what you said.
Okay, yeah, and even earlier than that, you could commit bad code and have a 500, and we would never be able to catch that.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So for me, that's it. Unless you have anything else to add, I think this was a great and productive meeting.
Yeah, likewise. Daniel has some last wise words to say.
Not really. I'm just.
It sounded like you were going to say something.
I was just looking at the clock.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. I'm gonna break the awkward silence, or let me just do another awkward silence because I love them. That's it. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
This was awesome.
In 7 days, I guess.
All right. Goodbye. Have a great day.
See you next week. Well, that's Bye.